Excellent!
What's up guys, welcome back to Paul's Hardware. Today's video is going to be all about testing and benchmarking this $3,500 PC that I built just a couple weeks ago in my August builds video. Now every month I do some builds at the beginning of the month, and then I build the system, and then I test it. And although this system came in a little bit late because I was waiting around to get a hold of this Corsair Air 740 case, I have gone through all of the motions to get some benchmarks run, some temperature testing, some overclocking of course, and don't worry if you're looking forward to the slightly less expensive build that I'm doing for September. That will be coming in about a week or so. I have lots of builds going on in September actually, but this is the $3,500 over-the-top SLI two-way 1080s. It's got a 6850K processor in there, Asus X99 Deluxe 2 motherboard, 2 EVGA GTX 1080 for the win, cards in SLI, and then I actually left out the hard drives for this build, so if you look at the parts list in the description, it adds up to about $3,350 right now if you buy it in the US, of course. Apologies to those of you who are paying higher prices outside of the US, but this is for high-end gaming, productivity as well. You shouldn't do something like this if you're just going to be gaming on it because it's definitely overkill. You should go with something more along the lines of the $1,200 system that I built last month, so check that out too. Link is in the description. So let's start off with what I liked about this build, and of course what I've been trying to do with these builds that I do every month is make them all off the shelf, unless I'm doing something that's more specifically for modding. Everything that you see here came in the boxes with all of the hardware that I installed. I also like that the color scheme came together. Black and white, of course, is fairly simple, but everything blends nicely. It's not too gaudy or over the top. Got the LEDs from the fans sort of illuminating everything, and then the RGB options, of course, with the graphics card and motherboard as well. I have air-cooled GPUs, which is a little bit simpler than going with liquid cooling. I do have liquid cooling on the CPU. Had pretty good overclocking with the system, especially on the CPU. The GPUs were decent, but again, they're air-cooled and there's two of them, so there's a lot more heat generated by both of those. And then, of course, there's just the pure raw power of this build with the two-way 1080s and the 6850K. It's pretty beastly when it comes to performance, and I'll show you that, of course, in just a moment. And what I didn't like about this build, first off, was the RGB LED lighting control software situation. Now, granted, this is a little bit my fault because I'm dealing with the Corsair software. The software for the EVGA graphics cards was controlled through Precision XOC, and then the Asus software, which has the AI Suite for overclocking and stuff, but also the Aura Suite, or the Aura software, which is specifically for controlling the RGB LEDs. Now, when I reviewed the Asus X99 Deluxe 2 just about a month ago, I did comment on the updated version of the software and how they had introduced some more features. However, I encountered some stability problems this time around, which was a little frustrating. Getting the software even to load became a problem, and in fact I would have to turn the system off and turn the power to the system off and wait for something in the memory to clear out or the capacitors to flush their power just to get the Aura software to load again. So if you're having that same issue, turning your system off and turning the power off can get it to happen or to fix. But downside to that is that when you turn the power off, you actually lose your RGB profiles that you might have set up. So that's kind of a pain in the butt too. There are some default LEDs that are on the motherboard that stay on all the time. So if you were to, for instance, set this system up and for use in like a dorm room or in your, in your room where you sleep, and you wanted to have all the LEDs off at night, you'd have to turn the power switch off. Then you lose your profiles, and it's just not quite ideal. So I think Aura software needs a little bit more work, a little bit more tweaking and tuning. The EVGA Precision X software as well gets the job done. There's just not a lot of different lighting options that are available, and you have to individually select each GPU before you go into the LED software control, so you can't sync them and control them both at the same time. For that reason, even getting the pulsating color changing stuff with the EVGA cards was a little bit more difficult to get synced up, although you could sync it up by timing it or just setting it that way and then restarting the computer, and then everything would be kind of synced up after that. Point being that if you really want that full RGB LED control, either A, make sure you're not mixing up your brands, so maybe go with the Asus GTX 1080s instead of the EVGA so you can use the same software for everything, or just maybe not be so worried about the RGB LEDs, or just give it a little bit more time because obviously they're still a little bit of a work in progress on all sides. Speaking of software though, one of the first things I did was load up the Asus Ai Suite software, which will allow you to do the 5-way optimization, the one-click automatic overclocking, fan tuning, especially the fans I wanted to get tuned right out of the gates, and overclocking I also wanted to check out, but had a little bit of a weird situation with the auto overclocking. It was, shall we say, aggressive. Why not 6? 6.1, we're done. Good night, folks. Shutting her down. So, the Asus Ai Suite tried to overclock my 6850K to over 6 GHz, which was a little aggressive, even though the Corsair H100i V2 is a very well-performing closed-loop CPU cooler. That's just a little bit more than anyone should find reasonable, unless you're using liquid nitrogen or something like that. So I had to go back into the BIOS and reload optimize defaults. And then I went in and did the old-school manual method, did a simple multiplier overclock, got myself to 4.4 gigahertz, was running at 1.29 volts, and I find that to be a lot more reasonable than 6.1 gigahertz. I will say that the Fan Expert software did work admirably, though, and it automatically set up the fan profile. It reaches out to all the fans, sees their min-max speeds, set up some automatic profiles for them, and then it gives you a little widget that you can click to do a silent or a standard or a performance fan curve. And I was going with silent most of the time, which is what you're hearing right now, or maybe not hearing. It's very quiet, although I did jump up to performance when I was doing the full bore GPU testing. Speaking of, though, let's move on to that overclocking temperatures and noise, which I kind of already teased with my CPU overclock. Again, 4.4 gigahertz, 1.29 volts. Overclocked both of the GPUs using the EVGA Precision X OC utility. I will say that if you're overclocking a graphics card and you then go for a two-way setup, you might notice that you're not going to get quite the same overhead with two cards that you might expect with one. So I only was able to tack on a plus 45 GPU offset and a plus 200 memory offset. That's offset from the already overclocked specs from the EVGA for the win cards, of course, and that got me to 1766 base clock, 1905 boost, and when I was actually gaming, after spiking up to in the mid 2000 range, I was getting about 2025 megahertz, and then did throttle back down to about 1995, so right around the 2 gigahertz range for both GPUs, which is perfectly acceptable for something like this. CPU temperatures, while overclocked at idle, were 29 to 32 degrees Celsius, about 71 degrees Celsius while gaming on the CPU, and 84 degrees Celsius when I actually ran the stress test, and of course that is overclocked to 4.4 gigahertz. GPU temperatures at idle are 50 degrees Celsius, and that was with the fan off mode that's by default with the EVGA cards. 86 degrees C was what I hit max on the top GPU that was under a full Unigine Heaven benchmark gaming load, and that was the most I ever saw. When I was actually doing most of the games, it was hovering more around 79 degrees Celsius for the top card, so the hottest card, while gaming under a more moderate gaming load. So definitely some very decent overclocking. However, the alternative to the higher speeds and frequencies and performance you get with the overclocking is more noise. Right now I have Unigine Heaven running full speed, and everything's overclocked, and it is not the quietest experience I've ever had with a computer. It's not too bad considering we have overclocked hardware and a couple 1080s in there. The side panel does block a decent amount of the noise. Let's move into some testing. First off, 3D Mark Firestrike Extreme. I got 16,331 overall and 19,852 for the graphics score. Firestrike Ultra score was 9,032 overall and 9,592 on the graphics. And for 3D Mark Time Spy, the DirectX 12 test, 11,095 overall score, 12,611 on the graphics, and 6,601 on the CPU. Ashes of the Singularity is next at 4K in DirectX 12 mode, 70.7 average frames per second. Witcher 3, a new test in my benchmarks, also running at 4K, 60.1 average frames per second. That's with everything running at Ultra, of course. Moving on to Metro Last Light at 4K, 90.5 average frames per second. GTA 5 at 4K, 100.8 average frames per second. And then I also threw GTA 5 in running in ultra-wide mode at 3440 by 1440, got up to 124 average frames per second, so a great option for those of you rocking a Predator X34 or X35. And finally I threw Overwatch in there. It's not too difficult of a title to run. As you can see, at 4K I hit 233.4 average frames per second. So, in conclusion, this is a crazy powerful system. Two-way 1080 seems to be a great option for anyone who's really looking for that actual 60 plus frames per second 4K experience. Also for anyone who's looking to do 21 by 9, 3440 by 1440, especially at a higher frame rate like 100, 120, 144 hertz, this also seems to be a good option for that. Definitely overkill if you're just going to be gaming. If you're not going to be doing anything like content creation or video editing or just some more heavy lifting, then don't go for this system. Go for something more like the $1,200 build that I did last month. Of course, the trade-off is that with all of the hardware wedged in here, you're going to have higher temperatures and you're going to have a little bit more fan noise because the fans are going to have to run higher speeds to get all of that warm air out of there. Perhaps, maybe, this is kind of the point where you start transitioning over to where, like, I feel like a custom water cooling loop would be a good solution for something like this, because then you can have the power and the reduced noise and better airflow and all that kind of stuff. Of course, you're probably going to be spending another $1,000 to $1,500 to outfit this system with a water cooling loop, if not more than that. One last thing I wanted to point out is that if you check out my 1070 SLI video, which I'll link via a card up there, the numbers I got today were not that much better than 1070 SLI. Of course, that's a completely other argument of two-way cards versus a better, faster single card, and SLI isn't always going to scale and all that good stuff, but we'll save that for another video. Anyway guys, if you enjoyed this one, definitely hit the thumbs up button down there and check out the description for links to all the parts, for links to voting where you can vote on what builds I'm going to be building next month, and also links to my store where you can buy shirts and mugs and pint glasses and all that good stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and we'll see you in the next video.